Good afternoon. Glad to see you here this afternoon. And for our program entitled Christmas Treasures. And we'd like to thank the Iverson Memorial Funds for helping us sponsor our speaker this afternoon. This is sponsored by the Church Women. So just an announcement, our next meeting will be January 13th in the social room at 2 o'clock with the installation of officers. And then following the program this afternoon, we would like to invite you downstairs for lunch following the program and some time for visiting. I'd like to open today with a short devotion and a reading about traditions. You will be able to tell wonderful stories to your children and grandchildren about the marvelous things I am doing. And that's from Exodus 10, verse 2. And the story I'm going to share with you is it's written by, it doesn't say which Peel. Did you know, Sue? It's a Peel family Christmas tradition. And I'm sure that's Norman Vincent Peel's family, but I don't know who wrote it exactly. But it talks about their traditions. Traditions. You might have them for birthdays, annual family vacations, back to school. But I think Christmas time provides a pretty terrific tee-up for traditions to be continued and for new traditions to be made. Holiday traditions can be bittersweet if you have lost someone you love, yet they can still bring fulfillment. Knowing there's a get-together you can count on every year gives a sense of connectedness and stability. My family has a tradition that has been celebrated in my parents' home since before I was born, and I hope will continue long after I'm gone. Following the annual Christmas Eve pageant at Christ Church and Quaker Hill, Grandma and Grandpa Peel would come to our home, which was once theirs, in Pawling, New York. Before dinner, we would gather in the Christmas room, all of us dressed in our festive finery. Grandpa Peel would sit in the same chair with his legs crossed characteristically, open a Bible that my mother had given him, what had been given by Marble Collegiate Church when she was a child, and read from the Gospel of Luke chapter 2. Even as very little children, squirmy as we could be, we knew this was a sacred story, and these were sacred moments together. As we became more aware of the important work Grandma and Grandpa did, and the places they went, and the lives that they were able to so gratefully to touch, we understood that in those Christmas Eve moments, we were truly blessed. Blessed by the story being read, blessed by the presence of peace and togetherness, and blessed by this tradition. After Grandpa Peel passed away on Christmas Eve, 1995, at 93 years of age, my father took over the reading of Luke on Christmas Eve. And after my father passed away in 2002, my brother Andrew took on this honored role. With long-running traditions, faces and voices inevitably change. There is surely some sadness in this, but the sweetness lies in experiencing the tradition each year with eyes and hearts open to the people, present and past, the place, and the actions that make each year's celebration meaningful and uplifting. This Christmas Eve, there will be 22 people at my mother's home, the same house in Pawling. Our dear family friends, the Smiths, 3 generations of them, will join us as they have for almost 40 years. There will be reconnecting, memories shared, and traditions honored, not to mention delicious food to be eaten. Even our 6-year-old son is looking forward to those moments all together in the Christmas room on Christmas Eve, and not just for the presents he will receive after listening to the Gospel of Luke. Whatever your traditions, I hope you will include Jesus as part of them. Maybe you could even implement the reading of the Christmas story into your night, or take communion as a family, or have a testimony time together. Why not give your children the true meaning of Christmas this year? Because that's the best gift you could ever give them. Merry Christmas to each of you. May your Christmas traditions, long-standing and brand new, bring you a reassuring sense of wonder and joy. I thought that was kind of interesting. It made me start thinking about traditions in my own family or that I'm familiar with. And one of the things that came to mind was my grandmother, who loved to sing. And when she'd come and visit us out in the country church and she'd sing, she just sang with all gusto and joy. She was filled with singing. And as a child, you kind of wondered. She was calling attention to herself, but it gave me a joy of music. And I've got a grandson too who just loves to sing. So it's things like that that get passed on. My mother was a great baker, and if you didn't have Christmas without 20 kinds of cookies and all the Norwegian goodies. And we try to keep that up. We've had the Christmas story was always read, and Kurt's mother always made sure that we sang Christmas carols, even though the family as a whole wasn't very musical. We still sang Christmas carols, and we always ended with Silent Night and the Lord's Prayer, and that still is our tradition. Then there's things like pepper nuts and lefse and kringla and I just had a dear friend that passed away this year, and her family is choosing to keep on their Christmas Eve tradition too of lasagna and Cherry's Jubilee. These are things that add warmth and love and peace, connectedness, and all of that for us at Christmas. They may not seem important, but they do help us to focus on what is important at this time of year, which is the birth of our Savior Jesus. Would you please pray with me? Dear Lord, as we gather this afternoon, we ask that your Spirit would be among us, that you would help us to be filled with the importance and the true feeling of traditions, of sharing with each other, of sharing the Christmas story that you shared with us so many years ago. We pray that as we prepare for the coming of Christmas, that our hearts will be opened and our joys and our sorrows will all be placed in you, but with you in the manger, because that is where our salvation comes. That's where our hope for each tomorrow comes. And we thank you for that. In your name we pray. Amen. And then I'd like to introduce Ron and Jen Burbank, who are going to sing a song for us called Heirlooms.
tribesmen and shepherds down on their knees, bringing their treasures to lay at his feet. Who was this wonder, baby yet king, living and dying, he gave life to me. Time never changes the memories, the moment his love first pierced through me. All that I come from and all that I live for and all that I'm going to be. My precious Savior is more than an heirloom to me. My precious Jesus is more than an heirloom to me.
Thank you very much. Eric Bergeson is a native of Fertile, Minnesota. He is a born storyteller, international traveler, columnist, author, speaker, and musician. He speaks on elder care, using entertaining and instructive stories from his own experiences with relatives and neighbors to guide and inspire others in the art of caring for and befriending the elderly. He has written 6 books, the most recent being A Treasury of Old Souls, a collection of engaging stories about Eric's lifetime spent amongst a small town's aging population. Even as a young child, he found himself engaged in friendships with people in their golden years. In midlife, he realized that his own perspective on life, death, and relationships had been powerfully shaped by these unique friendships. I read his book and was very impressed with his perceptive insights and how much he values, respects, and celebrates the lives of the generations before him. Christmas is a perfect time to share the stories and traditions we remember from times past. Please welcome Eric.
Thank you, Sue. Thanks. Thank you. That was the blurb, which is supposed to get people who don't know me to buy the book. You all know better. Well, I got up early this morning and went to Grand Forks to sign books there for the morning. And so it was cold this morning, as you remember. It's warmed up since. And I want it, for the record, I want it known that it warmed up before my talk started, not during. The hot air came. And I had to wear a stocking cap, so that explains my hair, too. Well, yesterday I went to Hallock, and I played at the nursing home there, and they have a beautiful piano. Not as beautiful as this, but it's beautiful. And every time I go, though, they ask me, would you please hold back a little, because there's a lady who donated it, who the first time I played it, she thought I was going to wreck it. And she gets so upset that she's mad for 3 days. So they said, could you lay off a little bit? So I got some built-up repression that I need to get out. We'll warm the piano up like everything else is warming up today. Right. That's fun. Hello there. That is fun. This is a great piano. Let's see what's here. The model number here. The oil's been changed. C3. Yeah, that's a good one. Boy. So some of you are Scandinavian. I'm sure you're hankering from. Oh, I have to tell you, I went to a wedding in Norway this summer. For you Scandinavians. I had to catch my breath. And it was only 50 people invited to this wedding, and it was on a mountaintop outside of Oslo. It was friends from UND. They had met there, one Norwegian and one Russian. And as a compromise, they had the wedding in English, which was fortunate for me, and so I could understand. But afterwards, it's very formal. They're very formal. In fact, they had a very specific dress code that I didn't know enough to honor, but when you come that far, they're going to kick you out. So after the wedding, then, you have the big meal, and then you have toasts. And they explained that you can even do a song or whatever you want. And I decided to do the only Norwegian song I know. Jeg så glad at julet var. And that's all I know. But they knew the rest. And they finished it, and they said it was the most bizarre wedding toast they'd ever seen. So your Scandinavians probably want some Scandinavian music, so I have to do some Willie Nelson. In the twilight glow I see her, blue eyes crying in the rain. When we kissed goodbye and parted, I knew we'd never meet again. And love is like a dying ember, only memories remain. In a land that knows no parting, blue eyes crying in the rain. And someday when we meet up yonder, we'll stroll hand in hand again. In a land that knows no parting, blue eyes crying in the rain. There's your Norwegian music for tonight. So thank you. And because we have this beautiful piano, we must do some Chopin, because Chopin, yeah, we'll try it anyway. If we make it through, so much the better. Chopin was the first composer to have this type of piano. Beethoven didn't have this type of piano. Bach didn't have anything like this. There's no Bach piano music. It's harpsichord. And so Chopin was the first one who had an instrument that would be soft and loud. And where you could get it to hang on, to stop, or to hang on, like that. And he used that in his compositions. So he's the best piano composer there's ever been. Beethoven doesn't hold a candle, and Bach wasn't even there. But I maintain that Bach is the second greatest Lutheran ever, to Martin himself, which we probably just have to concede that he'd be the greatest Lutheran. This is a piece Chopin wrote. It's a waltz, after watching a dog chase his tail. There's the show panel. All right, thank you. Thanks. That is a lot more fun on a nice piano than anything else. Thank you. That piano has the sweetest sound in the right hand I've played in years. It really is nice. So, we talk about a treasury of Christmas memories. I was just remembering some of our traditions at home. The big tradition in our family is that we always say we're not going to buy any gifts this year because we have everything we need. And then it all falls apart 3 days before Christmas, and somebody heads to Fleet Farm and stocks up. And so 2 years ago, we had not a very big Christmas. We were planning nothing, and then it broke down, and I went to Walmart in Crookston for my splurge, and right at the front door, pistachios were there on sale. And I know our whole family loves pistachios. So I bought a pistachio bag for everybody. And that was our gift. I thought it was, it was $2.37 a piece, so it wasn't a splurge. So we got to opening gifts, and the first person opened their pistachios and went, uh-oh. Everyone else had gone to Walmart. It was the pistachio Christmas. We counted 40 bags of pistachios in the living room by the time we got done. And we enjoyed them. We've had some bizarre Christmas. One of the best Christmases is when we had a blizzard and a bunch of travelers got snowed in, and we had no gifts, so Mom went in the cupboard, and some people have nice dishes, but we have mugs when I was growing up, and I have mugs to this day, coffee mugs that don't match. Why have a match? One's from 4-H, one's from Prozac. Those drug companies put out mugs. And the library, and I collect mission statement mugs, because the Extension Service even had a mission statement mug where they're serving and carrying on. And the library system gives their mission, and I've got a library mug. So when we had unexpected company, Mom would go and get everybody the nicest mugs and appropriate for their whatever they did and wrap them up, and we'd put all the regular gifts away and just have a few mugs to exchange when we had people stormed in. That was one fun Christmas. An uncle who had never been home for Christmas had to stay because he was stormed in. Lots of memories. This was the first Christmas now coming up that I'm going to be without, or we're going to be without my great aunt Olive, who passed away in February at 103 years old. And I do not recall if we had her out last Christmas or not, because she was not in good shape. But every Christmas previous, we would have her out, and it's quite a production when there's ice, when there's somebody with hips just waiting to snap. And so you have to be careful with Aunt Olive when you bring her out. But she enjoyed it. She didn't want any gifts. She had everything she needed, as did we. And so we never planned ahead. We just went and got her the day of Christmas. I have a new book out called A Treasury of Old Souls, which Sue read the official version. That's designed for people who find it on Amazon. The real reason I wrote it is because I had the weirdest childhood, but it might not be so different from some of yours. Because I was 4 years old, and my dad was teaching Greek. He was a professor of Greek at a Bible college in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And we lived in the suburbs in a trailer court. I loved that trailer house. I still do. I love trailer houses. And we were ready to embark on a suburban existence. I was enrolled in kindergarten in Winnipeg at a suburban school, and we were ready to roll, and Grandpa called. Melvin, my grandpa from the nursery, called Dad, and it was a 35-second phone call. He said, "It's time for you to come home and take over the nursery." Click. That was how Grandpa operated. He never said bye or never waited for a response. He just issued orders, and then it went click. And so we hooked up that trailer house to a semi, and we brought it to Fertile from Winnipeg, and we had to sit at the border and eat a bag of carrots because they wouldn't let us bring it in to the United States. And my mom wasn't about to let that bag of carrots go to waste. and I have a thing against carrots since. And they also took all our houseplants, which she had hidden in the water heater compartment. And I remember her crying because of that. I think she was crying less about the houseplants than about the knowledge that she was going back. She was raised in the city. She was going back to the bizarro world of Bear Park Township and sitting their trailer house 50 feet from her in-laws' house. When we got there, it was 1970, and let's think about the demographics around here. In the 1915, which was Norman County's peak population, I wouldn't have guessed it, but Norman County had 15,000 people in 1915. Today, there's barely 5,000. Yeah, there's more than 5 people. Yeah. 5 people per township. You didn't have enough for a board. But after 1951, people started leaving because the farms started getting bigger. In the old days, it was 80 acres per farm, 100 acres per farm, 8 kids, 50 chickens, some pigs, everything. And it was, as my Aunt Olive said, it was a mess. Driving around, she remembered World War I era. She said it was a mess. There was no lawnmowers. It was the sheep or whoever did the mowing. There was no attention paid to neatness except on the very wealthy farms. And you didn't really aspire to that. My Aunt Alla once described a family as being very prominent in Flum. I would say if you have a heartbeat, you're prominent in Flum. So it was a mess, but gradually the population went down, and by 1970, all of the people around the nursery, there were like 20 different farmsteads filled with old people. They were in their 60s. I mean, I had not met people this old very often up in Winnipeg in the suburbs, and they were all working for Grandpa, and so I was surrounded by older people. And I think anybody who was raised in a smaller town is surrounded by older people, and they got to be my friends. I remember Mrs. Rice worked. She was 70 years old, and she worked at the nursery, and I started playing pranks on the crew because the boss's kid can get by with anything, and I put a worm in her Coke. And she took a sip, and she took another sip. Finally, lunch period was over, and she took and downed the whole thing like that. I think the worm had dissolved. And Mrs. Rice, the year later, got throat cancer. And I was convinced as a second grader that I had caused it, but I didn't want to get arrested, so I said nothing. The guilt ate away at me. And so I was around these older people whose kids had moved to Anoka for jobs and whose grandkids were being raised in Anoka and Edina and Bloomington and everywhere. There were no kids around in our neighborhood. I had to bike 5 miles to find a playmate. And so it was an odd time in our history that I landed back at this nursery, and my brother wasn't born yet. And it was so odd. Mabel Nelson was used to, in the 50s, having trick-or-treaters come, and she would make these homemade popcorn balls that were so good, and the kids would come flocking. In the 1970s, she had to call and issue invitations. How sad is that, to get anyone to come for her popcorn balls? And my parents, bless their hearts, said, "You are not trick-or-treating in town. Those poor townspeople get everybody. The country kids come in, and then they walk around and fill their bags. It's not right. We're going to all the people, and then we're going to visit with them." And that was not what I had in mind for Halloween. But now I remember Walter and Edna Schoen. We went and we had to go in and sit and wait. There's 20 more houses to go to. And so I one time took inventory of how many people I have known in Fertile. This is both customers at the nursery and Fertile people who have passed away of old age, whose first name I knew, and who I knew, and they knew me. And I quit at 450. Okay? How many suburban kids, had I stayed in Winnipeg, have the same experience? None. My cousin is a pastor at a suburban church in Wayzata. He went 3 years. This is a 400-member church. He went 3 years without a funeral. If that happened out here, we'd starve. And we'd be lonely. Because when do you get everybody together? It's a funeral. And it is different because the people come from the city, say the offspring of somebody comes from the city, and they come to the funeral and they're sad. And they are, but the people there from the local are just happy to get together. And so there's this, and they knew the person was going. And I noticed the difference when my friend Artis, she had pancreatic cancer. She was 92. Artis knew what cancer was about because she took care of her husband for many years while he was dying of cancer. It wore her out. And he died, and about 6 months later, Artis came zooming out of the house in scarves and hats, and she was going to enjoy the rest of her life. And she did, and then she developed a type of pancreatic cancer which she's decided not to operate on, and the way she was going to die was it was going to explode. It was wrapped in veins of some sort that were going to just deteriorate, and so it would be sudden. And she just said, I'm going to have fun. So then I heard Artis. I worked with Artis on getting our assisted living in Fertile. She was a big activist, and that's all she wanted to talk about. It was none of this health stuff. And so then I heard Artis was in hospice. And I felt bad, and I thought, well, maybe I should call her. But I thought, no, Artis won't want to be called now. And so I went uptown to the cafe, and there was Artis, looking the same as ever, her scarf and her hat. And she looked at me and said, you look like you saw a ghost. And I said, well, I heard you were in hospice. She said, they only come Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then she passed away at age 92, and her kids came home, and we had all adjusted. All her friends, we were proud of Artis for how she went about her last days, but we were unprepared for how sad her kids were, because they had not been home for Artis's last, let's just say, 30 years, 40 years. So it's a different thing when the people come home compared to those of us who are here all the time and watch people age and kind of get used to it, which is not bad, not a bad thing. So my Aunt Olive was, I don't even know how I got on that topic. She was alive during World War I. She remembers walking around the town section. You know how out here everything's in squares. You know it in Ada better than we do in Fertile even. We have 3 swamps that goof up everything. But it's square here until you get to the curvature of the earth switch in Highway 9 there. No other reason for that curve. They would walk around the section picking up kids as they go and singing on Sunday nights. And then they'd keep going around in the evening in the summers. This is the summers. And then go a few times, walk miles and miles, and then drop them off the last way around. That was their activity. Can you imagine getting away from the television that long to do that? Much less find a quarter section where there were enough people to sing. And so Olive remembers that. She remembers being ashamed because they couldn't have company at Christmas because they could not afford chairs. And the one time they had some surprise company, she had to sit on the milk can, and she fell off. And it was a trauma to her. She remembered it even when she slipped into a little dementia. The story changed depending on her needs of the moment. And she hurt her hip, and she was telling Dr. Canteen, as she called him, it's Dr. Canton in Crookston, but she called him Dr. Canteen, the state champion doctor, because he won an award. And she said, this all goes back to 1917. I had to sit on the milk can at supper, and I fell down. And of course, he had to accept it. To his credit, he would prescribe her lemon drops for some of her ailments, and they worked like a charm. Oh. So the old days were different. One time, Olive's father gave her and the other two girls, a doll with a china head, which was an extravagance. At that time, they lived in Canby, Minnesota. It's a sad story, and Olive only found out about it in her last years, the truth. Her father and his three brothers were raised in Iowa. They were very successful in farming, and they got rich. Then the oldest brother, who in the Norwegian culture of that time rules, told the other three brothers to put down their farms as collateral. He wanted to go into the livestock business in Sioux City. He went broke. They lost their farms. They rebuilt, and he did it again and went broke, and they lost their farms. So they all had to disperse. One went to Saskatchewan. My great-grandfather went to Canby, where he found some cheaper land, and they started farming. They had a huge, square, old Sears Roebuck house, like I just drove past out in the valley. They were all built in the mid-teens, early teens, 1912 era, when there was prosperity. And they had that the first year, but they lost their crop to grasshoppers. That was where Alla was born. Then they went down to a smaller house. By the third year of losing their crop to grasshoppers, they were in a shack. And then they lost that too. So her father, who had bought the China doll, decided and found in the farm magazine a patch of land near Twin Valley that was cheap. And he assumed it was Red River Valley, like Ada soil. He thought it was Ada soil, not Twin Valley soil. And so he bought it sight unseen and put the family in 1916 on the train with their livestock and all their machinery, and brought them up to Ada. And they arrived, or to Twin Valley, I'm sorry. They arrived in Twin Valley in March. It was snow on the ground, fresh snow, so they couldn't get out to their farm that night. He got sick in the hotel that night and died. 42 years old, leaving 7 kids with a 35-year-old wife, my grandma. Great-grandma. And Olive. And my grandpa, Melvin. Melvin was 12. His brother was 15. They went out to the farm. They did the farming. And Lena, the mother, did the business stuff. And Alla remembered it clearly because she was a free spirit, just like her father. She liked to read. She liked to put on plays and programs. And her father was a Shakespearean scholar. She said he wasn't practical at all. In fact, she said, it's a good thing he died. Because she always looked at everything in the positive light, and to this extreme. She said, if he would have stayed alive, we would have lost the farm again. It was Mama who went over to Ada here, to the banker, and paid the interest once a year on that farm. And so that was an interesting piece of history. We didn't find out about the 3 times going broke until Alla was in her 90s. Some relatives came to visit, and they told us. Which was the rogue brother, who was the one who out of guilt kept visiting them and keep telling Alla that she was a worthless cook. She resented it. Things were so tough, but they were tougher back in Norway and Sweden. That's why they had to come over. Aunt Alla's mother, Lena, the one who ended up keeping the farm when she was 35 and raising 7 kids, was put on a boat when she was 16 and sent to Iowa, where she had a 7-year contract to work off for the price of her ticket at a farm in Iowa. It was a bad farm, bad people. They were abusive. But the Bergesons, were next door, and they bought her contract, and she married one of their boys. That's how it was. I just went over to Stavanger, Norway this summer and saw the harbor where they left. And it was had more of an impact on me than I thought it would. What's worse, though, was her 6-year-old sister, Pearl, was put on the boat later by herself. And the family that was paid, they gave money to a family to take care of her. As soon as the boat left the dock, they shoo, get away. You aren't eating any of our food. She was on her own. And so Pearl came over. She lived with them when they were in Canby and worked at the blind school in Gary, South Dakota, which is still there. It's now a hotel and a restaurant and a pheasant resort. It's incredible. It's an incredible building, but she worked there in 1910. And Aunt Alla and I went down there to see it. It's 300 miles, and she was 100 years old when we did it. But we did, and we ate at the restaurant, and she talked to the owner and everything. It was exciting. But Aunt Pearl worked there, and then she would stay with relatives. And so the problem was that naturally Aunt Pearl was a little mentally unstable. Aunt Alla loved to hear hymns. She loved all hymns, and I loved to play hymns. So when I was at her place with her piano, I'd play a hymn, and there was only one hymn that she didn't like. And that was Softly and Tenderly, Jesus is Calling. And I never understood why, and I finally got it out of her. When Aunt Pearl, came to stay at that little farm in Twin Valley where the 8 of them were, and when she was mentally losing it, she would get up in the middle of the night and sing Softly and Tenderly. And she also insisted that the neighbor man come and wash her feet, and they did whatever they could to get her feeling better. Aunt Pearl was eventually committed in Fergus Falls, and she's buried there in an unmarked grave. And we don't know when she died. Sad, sad things. And it wasn't until I was asked to sing at a funeral, Softly and Tenderly, that I really understood what was going on with Aunt Pearl. You know the hymn. It goes, softly and tenderly Jesus is calling, calling to you and to me. Then there's one verse that goes like this. See on the portals he's watching and waiting, waiting for you and for me. Portals, boat windows. So that was Aunt Pearl's favorite hymn that she sang. In Olive's things, after she passed away this February, she had 17 boxes of stuff. They used to not let people bring anything into the nursing home. Now the problem is they let them bring everything. And so I spent all of March going through. She kept every card she ever had gotten. And but there were some good things as well. And in it was a letter from Pearl and Lena's father, the man who sent them over. He sent 9 of his 10 children to the United States thinking that was best for them. Then the 10th one died, and his wife died. And when he was writing his letter, which my grandmother translated from Norwegian, he was sitting by himself wondering what he had done back in Norway. I think a lot of them assumed they'd come back after they made their fortune, but no one ever got that far. And there was no money for him to go over. So that was the last he. So if we start complaining, people, we got it pretty good. We don't have that sort of heartbreak to deal with on a daily basis. And I think it shaped my Aunt Alla because she thinks everything was wonderful. Well, after all that, yes, everything would be wonderful. I didn't know Aunt Olive until 1996. If you remember the winter of 96, the 97 winter was the real one, bad one where we had 7 feet of snow and then all the you had the flood here, you know. I shouldn't. You remember that? 96 was cold, and it got down to 40 below, 45 below a couple of nights, and I was in Fresno, California, where the grass was green and the frogs were chirping, because I had gotten out of there and I was staying with my uncle and aunt. And then the phone rang, and it was my aunt who said my great-aunt Olive was in a tizzy. Would you do something? Well, as you know, when it gets cold, and I experienced this the last 2 days, when things get really cold, people get on each other's nerves, and they develop crises, and they divorce, and it just falls apart. Everyone's life falls apart. And they start coming up with reasons not to like each other. And in Olive's case, she had fallen and broken her hip and was in the Twin Valley nursing home, but that was fine. She was happy as a lark. And no, they sold all her belongings, and that didn't really bother her. They didn't ask, but they did. And then a delegation of relatives came in they were always kind of mad at Alla because she spent a lot of money and she traveled and she didn't care and she didn't worry about the farm and she was financially not that strong. And they, for some reason, in that cold winter, decided to come in, at 3 of them, and say to Olive that when she died, she would have to donate her body to medical science because they weren't going to pay for the funeral. Imagine what could possess you to do that in February. It must have been the cold. So Aunt Olive was in a tizzy because she's always wanted a funeral worthy of the Queen of England. And replanned it. In fact, we've made 5 trips to the undertaker, as she called it, to revise the pallbearer list because she kept outliving them. And so they did that, and this was 1996, I had just agreed to take over the nursery, so I knew I was coming into untold wealth. And I said, I'll take care of your funeral. No problem. She was 85, it could happen anytime. So I'll do that, like this. And I came home after that on the Amtrak, and I got home and I was on her check blanks, I was her power of attorney, I was everything. And she had kicked all those other relatives out of her business. And so from that time on, I was it. And so when she had a project, I was her chauffeur, I was her everything, with the help of Aunt Dee Dee. And so 3 years later, she was 88 now. 88 years old. She'd been in the nursing home 3 years. And she called me. And she said, I am sick of this nursing home. I've rented an apartment. And I'm moving on Tuesday. And I want you to help. She couldn't lift a thing, so help meant do it. Okay? And we went, and she got into an apartment, and we filled that thing with junk. We went to Boys Ranch or wherever that place is in Fargo, trip after trip, filling my pickup to get enough stuff in that apartment so that when she did move out, she could have a rummage sale to end all rummage sales. And so we filled that place up, and she lived there 7 more years. How many people have lived in a nursing home 3 years, then just decided to move out for 7 years? That does not happen. I think it was a pretty good comeback myself. Now, it wasn't all easy because she lived 20 miles from me. It was a Johnson Apartments in Twin Valley, 8 units, all with ladies with 85 years or older, so they could take care of each other a little. But when I would call to see what was going on and the phone was dead, what do you do? So I'd jump in the car and drive down at 9 at night and knock on Olive's door, and she'd come and open. What are you doing here? Well, it's because she didn't know how to put that remote phone back on the charger, that it was dead. That's why it was dead. And so I'd come in and I say, I'm here to put the phone on the charger. And then we'd have a little bread pudding or whatever was in the fridge, and I'd go home. And so when she needed something, she'd call, and this was before caller ID. You know, that changed everything. It ended my prank phone calling career, for one thing. Probably fortunately, because I was becoming a solid citizen and I wouldn't have given it up on my own. Can you imagine? Nursery owner charged in phone harassment case. Yeah. But when Olive called, I could tell it was her ring anyway. You know, you could sometimes tell. And one time she called and I knew what she wanted. And I didn't want to answer, but I did. And it was in May when I was tired and busy. And she said she wanted to go to her baby brother's 60th wedding anniversary. And she wanted me to take her. She was 91. He was 88. And he and his wife, Adeline, lived in Reno. Well, I thought that's nonsense at first, but then the other thing is, we're always too scared to take older people out. Why not? I remember there was a man in the nursing home in Fertile. He was on the front porch on Labor Day weekend. I went in to see my grandpa, and he was crying, please, please take me to Rolog. I almost loaded him up to go, but his son came and said, oh, you can't, your heart can't take that, and they put him back in his room. Well, he died 2 weeks later. How much better if he had died under a steamer at Rolog? Come on, folks. What are we scared of? Probably wouldn't have. but he'd been happy. So we need to try things. So I said, let's just try it. I called Northwest Airlines. They said, yeah, we'll take care of it. We'll get a cart in Denver. We'll change planes. And I got a room in Reno at her favorite casino, 2 rooms. And because she had favorite casinos, because she taught her whole career in Nevada. And we were ready to go. And the night before the trip, it was July, was my class reunion in Fertile. And so I was up at the American Legion. They're having coffee and milk. Or cookies and milk. Or something. And my uncle called. And he said, Aunt Alla went uptown to Twin Valley to get her hair done for the trip. And when she came out, she fell and broke her arm. And her blood pressure, she went into shock. Her blood pressure went to nothing. They revived her twice on the way to Fargo to St. Luke's or whatever they call it this week. And so I went home and I called Olive, and by then she had recovered. She was perky. She said, you go to Reno, I'll be fine. So I got up the next morning and went to Reno. And it wasn't until I came home that I found out the rest of the story. The next day, Olive was better. Her heart was fine. Her arm was in a cast. And like with Medicare, the way it is now, when you're well, they kick you out of the hospital. No more observation. No, you go home. She had to be out by noon on Saturday. I was her usual chauffeur, but I was in Reno. The rest of the relatives were out of favor due to the medical science thing. So she called a cab for Fargo to Twin Valley. And the cab company didn't want to send one of their yellow cabs. They were busy. They said, for a little extra, we could send you in a limo. Would that be okay? And she said, yes, that would be just fine. So they brought the limo, and Olive got in, and they went to Twin Valley, and I got to back up a little in this apartment. These ladies got along pretty well on the surface, but underneath there's a lot of undercurrents. You know, I think you've had that in Ada when Florence was around. Wasn't there a lot of restraining orders back then? It's just as bad in every senior apartment, especially in the laundry room. And so there's jealousy there. And when one of them would get company, they would bring them up and down the hallway just to make sure the rest of them knew that they had company and the others didn't. So when Alla's limo pulled into Twin Valley, as luck would have it, 3 of the women were on the front porch. And they said, who could be coming in a limo? And they saw Alla's old shoe come down, and they knew. And she said it was the best $95 I've ever spent in my life. And she put the best spin on it. She said, it was so good that I broke my arm. I couldn't have made that trip to Reno. I would have died. But they knew I tried. That's all that matters. They knew I tried. And I got to meet those nice nurses down at St. Luke's. So it was all for the good. Finally, at age 95, Olive went into the nursing home on her own terms, as she put it. I regret nothing. My goodness. And she went in, and they asked her, somebody said, you seem like you could still take care of yourself. She said, it's time I got weighted on hand and foot. And she did. It was the Fertile Hilton. She called it the Fertile Hilton. And she said she got the flu, and she said, I have never had so much fun having the flu. They bring me hot blankets. They brought me tea at 10 p.m. Can you imagine? It just can't be beat. And she always wondered why she got treated better than everybody else at the Hilton. There were various theories. First one was she thought her pension was bigger than anyone else. She said, couldn't you try to get at the books? And I said, no, I could not try to get at the books. And then it was that, and finally in the last year, she settled on the theory that the owner of the nursing home, which is her term for the administrator, his mother was from the same island in Norway as her mother. So that must be it. That's why she got treated better than anybody else in the whole Fertile Hilton. And that's when we started the birthday parties, because I had failed on her 90th birthday. I had said we could just have cake in the common room at the apartments, and that did not go over really well. It was a round number birthday, and we were supposed to throw a World's Fair, I think. And when I finally showed up at the birthday she organized herself, she looked at me and said, "You're my worst enemy." Because I didn't. So I had to make up for that, and we had birthday parties. But this goes back to when she taught school in Ulen in the 1930s at District 29. She bounced around from school to school. She was even in Bear Park one year, teaching Lila Linus's school. But she quit there because they were so Norwegian-y, the kids, that when they did their Christmas program, they sang Jangle Bells, Jangle Bells. And it wasn't her idea of a good program. She got made fun of by her friends who showed up from Twin Valley, which apparently is better. I don't know. But anyway, she taught down in Ulen, and she followed a strict schoolmaster, and she was anything but strict. She broke all the rules. She played crack the whip with the kids on the playground. She bought softball equipment. She played and came in dirt head to toe and rubbed Jergens lotion on her hands and taught the second half of the day. The kids loved her. But the school board did not. The one of them came in and pounded on her desk and said, "You have got to have more discipline." And she didn't have enough discipline. And so the final straw was when she used school board money to buy a case of toilet paper for the school outhouse at a time when the Sears Roebuck catalog was good enough for everybody else, and they fired her. Her contract was not renewed for the next year, and the kids went on strike. They said, "We aren't going to school if Miss Bergeson doesn't come back." And they did hire her back, and she was there for 4 more years. Well, she was pretty tight with those kids, and she was till the day they died. And so when she was in her 90s, when we had birthday, the first list was her school kids. And they were from Bernice Okeson from Twin Valley, and a couple from Lake Park, and all over. About 6 of them would come. And we'd have a birthday party, and she got so disgusted with them because they were getting older and didn't want to drive at night. And what fun is a party when you can't drive, can't stay till after dark? And then she would pick the other guests very carefully. This started in May, the planning for the party. And I think another key to living to 103, is which we finally lived to, is always having a plan. Always having something to look forward to. For her, after May, it was her September 28th birthday. And so we started compiling the list on May, and this year she wanted the Severson boys from Ulen to come because she hadn't seen them since they were in 2nd grade, and they were so sweet. And one of them had even, on the gate to the pasture she had to walk through to get to school, he had put balloons and streamers and a sign that said, "Here goes the Queen of the World." She wanted to see him one more time, too. But she didn't want their wives to come to the party because the Severson boys were so shy, and their wives would just talk the whole time. And so if you could just invite the boys and not the wives. That was my job, and so I had till September to figure that out. And in July, I was speaking in Dilworth, and I brought this dilemma up. And I asked the crowd for help in case, and they just laughed. Thanks a lot. And afterwards, people came up and were talking, and then these 2 women approached. And they introduced them. Well, they didn't introduce themselves. They just said, "We're the wives." And we'll stay home. So they stayed home. And the birthday party, and it was good. Olive had a 6th sense for who needed to be invited because they weren't around much longer. The Severson, one of them passed away right away. She wouldn't have gotten to see him again. Other times she would call and say, "You must go visit blank. We must go visit blank." And inevitably, they were gone within 2 weeks. I don't think it was anything Olive did. I think it was her 6th sense for who needed to be visited. And I write about it in the book. And one of the things people my age, and you just fear, is a last visit when you know it's the last visit. And I talked to hospice people about it, and there was one woman who told me a story. She was a hospice nurse, and she got attached to her patients, and then she got a scholarship to go away for a month and study, and she had to say goodbye to her patients, and so she was all emotional with this one man. She said, "I'm It's been so good. And he says, yeah, okay, bye. And when she walked out, he looked at his wife and said, just where in the hell does she think I'm going? Wasn't what he had expected. Aunt Dalla, we had one last visit with her sister-in-law, Norma. We knew it was the last visit. Her cancer had kicked up again. She was not well, and we were warned that 10 minutes was all she could take. It was 3 hours. Cancer was not brought up once, nor was death, nor was last visit. We laughed the whole time. I found out about her first husband. I had never found out the truth about him before. She was in no mood to tell fibs. The truth came out. How she met my great uncle, how she thought she'd never have anything to do with men again after her first husband, and then she met my great uncle. All of this family history spilled out. And we left and we said, it was a great time, and we'll, we didn't say see you again. All she said is, well, we'll see how this works out. It was easy and probably one of the great experiences you'll ever have. So we don't need to be scared of those last visits that we know are last visits. Just enjoy them. Just enjoy them. So Alla had a gift for that. She also had a gift for perspective on life, but it was sometimes skewed. She was the oldest resident of the nursing home, and when I rolled her down the hall to take her out for coffee one time, and all the people were in the hall, and she said about as loud as she could, "They keep these poor people alive so long these days." And do you know a lot of the very old people I've talked to in their upper 90s and in nursing homes, frankly say they keep us alive too long. Because the worst of it is they heal the heart, they heal the strokes or prevent the strokes, and then you get Alzheimer's. There's no cure for that. So we've got a problem with keeping ourselves alive too long, quality of life as opposed to quantity. Olive was big on quality, although her quality of life never gave off until the very end. The last 7 years of her life in the nursing home were the best ever. And I'll tell one more story. She had friends. She made friends quickly at the lunch table, at the nursing home, at the Hilton. Some of them she didn't like, but they liked her. And one was Myrtle. And Myrtle would always try her to get to come to Bible study. And Alla said, I'm 102 years old. I've had enough Bible studies, and I read my own Bible in the morning. I'm not going to Bible study. But Myrtle would not give up, and it got to be so miserable for Olive that finally, and I found out about this because whenever she was in a panic, she called me and said, we have to go uptown for coffee. And the reason to go uptown for coffee is because her room at the nursing home was bugged. And so we couldn't talk there, of course. So we went uptown for coffee, and she was telling me this. So she said last Tuesday, I got up and prayed that morning, and I prayed that the Lord would take Myrtle. And at 9 o'clock, the nurses came in. This is 2 hours later, and they had just found Myrtle. And all of a sudden, am I guilty of murder? I said, I don't think they'll get it to stick, but you should probably feel a little guilty. So they had Myrtle's funeral in the nursing home. Myrtle got her back. And as Myrtle's best friend, and murderer, Alla was rolled right up to the front. And right before the service was to start, the owner of the nursing home, Barry, came and unlocked Alla's wheels and pulled her into the office. Said, we have to talk. And she said, I thought the IRS had finally caught up with me. Here's what happened. When Aunt Alla gets these anonymous surveys about nursing home service, she doesn't just check the boxes. She would write a 10-page letter naming every staff member that she could think of. How wonderful the maintenance man is, Emil, and he was wonderful, and the mail lady, always on time, and just write this glowing letter, and then you don't sign it because it's anonymous, and send it to the county. The county lady got it, and she thought it was so cute that she violated confidentiality and copied it off and mailed it back to the Fertile Hilton. Whoever opened the letter at the Fertile Hilton thought it was really cute and decided it was Myrtle who wrote it. So they gave it to Myrtle's family, who, when Myrtle passed away, thought, what could be more appropriate than they have that letter read at her funeral? So Aunt Alla was at the funeral about to hear her own letter written or read as if it was Myrtle's. And the crisis was averted when, well, it wasn't, because she was mad. And Barry said, we owe you. And she said, you sure do. That was the biggest disaster at the nursing home. So, but it was fun. And then last year, Olive got sick, and I went to Arizona, and my policy was go to Arizona, because when she was 87, I felt guilty going to Arizona because she might die. If I had stopped then, I'd have never gotten to Arizona. So when she was 102, I didn't quit. And so before I went to Arizona, I tried to compensate for my being a bad nephew by showing her some pictures and writing the names on the back, the activity we never get around to, but we should write the names on the back of these old pictures so people know. And there kept appearing this picture of this man saluting like this, and I said, who's that? Nothing. And it came up again, well, who's this? Finally, it said Joe on the back. Who's Joe? Oh, we went dancing a couple times in the 30s. Oh, okay. And I didn't say anything more. I went to Arizona, and about 2 weeks later, the Hilton staff called me. And they said, you've got to talk to Olive. She said that this boy, Joe's relatives, are mad at her for breaking up with him before the war. And they've taken the South Wing, and they've got hostages. And they're working their way towards her room to kill her. And so I called up Aunt Olive, and I said, how's things going? And she said, oh, it's just awful. She said, those people have got the whole South Wing. I said, what people? Joe's relatives. I said, well, what's the deal? What happened? Well, I broke up with him before he went to the war, and they're mad, and they're getting revenge. And I said, Aunt Olive, this was 75 years ago. And she said, I know, can you imagine holding a grudge that long? And that eventually faded. But last winter then, so I went to Arizona, and then I flew home. They said she wouldn't last the night. And I flew home, and I got there, and she was reading the newspaper the one time, which was fine with me. And so I said, I flew back a week later to Arizona, and I went in to inform her I was flying to Arizona. And I said, I've got to go get my car in Arizona. And she looked at me, and she said, you aren't going to miss my funeral. And I said, no, I'll hurry it up a bit if it's your funeral. And she was right on target. I got home, and then she was going downhill one day, and the last thing she said to me, well, there were a couple things, but the last thing before she went was she opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling like this, and said, is there anything I need to sign? And I said, no, everything's taken care of. And she went to sleep, and an hour later she was gone. So it was quite a thing. So that's one of the treasures in my life. I write about many others, but that's probably the most prominent one I'm thinking about these days. So, do you have time for one more song, or are we... One more song? Okay. I don't even know what to do. Take a drink of water. Well, we may as well keep it fairly downbeat. At Christmas, we always think about the less fortunate, and one of the less fortunate country singers ever was George Jones. He was always in trouble. He said, I'll love you till I die. She told him, you'll forget in time. As the years went slowly by, she still preyed upon his mind. He kept her picture on his wall and went half crazy now and then, but he still loved her through it all, hoping she'd come back again. He stopped loving her today. They placed a wreath upon his door. Soon they'll carry him away. He stopped loving her today. Kept some letters by his bed, dated 1962. And he had underlined in red every single I love you. I went to see him just today. Oh, but I didn't see no tears. All dressed up to go away. First time I'd seen him smile in years. He stopped loving her today. They placed a wreath upon his door. Soon they'll carry him away. He stopped loving her today. Now it gets difficult. Oh, she came to see him one last time. We always wondered if she would. It kept running through my mind. This time he's over her for good. He stopped loving her today. They placed a wreath upon his door. Soon they'll carry him away. He stopped loving her today. All right, it's coffee time. Thanks, everybody, for coming.